Welcome to Extraordinary Women, a podcast where everyday women talk about the extraordinary things they've achieved in their lives. With me, your host, Denise O'Brien. Welcome back to Extraordinary Women. I am your host, Denise O'Brien, and I have an amazing lady with me today, Julie Garland. And before I hand over and get Julie talking about her business, her experience, I just want to give you a little bit of a background as to who she is and why I asked her to be on my podcast. So Julie is the founder and CEO of Avtrain. And this is an online learning and certification body for drone operators and pilots across Europe. And Julie's going to talk a little bit more about that, I'm sure, during our interview. But I think what's extremely interesting here is that Julie is a former airline training captain as well, and an aircraft maintenance engineer. And not only that, she's also a barrister at law, a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, and an accredited mediator. And prior to setting up Avtrain, Julie was the CEO of Thunder Tiger Aviation, a Chinese investment company and drone pilot training organization. And prior to that, again, she was the director of compliance for Norwegian Air International. So an absolutely fascinating woman. I'm delighted to have you here, Julie. How are you?
I'm really well. Thanks so much for having me on, Denise. Delighted to be here.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, Julie, I became aware of you as I started to work in the kind of aviation sector with my business in leadership development. And I saw you speak at a couple of talks. And I just thought, oh my God, like this is an amazingly inspiring story. Your career trajectory, the whole lot is fascinating. But for our listeners, if we can start at the beginning, if you don't mind, and just a little bit about where you're from, where did you grow up, where did you go to school, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Howth in County Dublin, and which was fabulous. Grew up by the sea, still miss the sea. I live in Dublin city centre now. And I went to school locally, first of all, for primary school out of the Borough National School, and then for secondary school, I went to San Sabina. So started off with the nuns, and then I ended up going to boarding school on the south side. I went to Rathdown, and I have to say, I think that going to boarding school gave me my inherent or allowed my inherent streak of independence to come to the fore, which, I think I was about 14 when I went to boarding school until I was 18. So I spent the last 4 years of schooling there, and it was great. I was home at the weekend, so I still had the opportunity to spend time with friends and family. But at the same time, it gave you that independence and a concentration of your time, I think, and a focus while you're at school. So I really enjoyed it. My sister tried it as well and absolutely hated it. She lasted for a year and she was like, I'm not doing this. So it's horses for courses, it really suited me. And when I left school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I hadn't applied for college. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I didn't apply for anything. And I think it's one of the important things. We put so much pressure on people these days to have made decisions about what they want to do by the time they're going into secondary school with subject choices, by the time they go through transition year with subject choices about what their future holds. And I think we really need to reinforce that it doesn't matter what you do at school. It does matter. Of course, it's important, but it doesn't define your future. It's up to you to define your future, not what subject choices you take or what you go to college or what you do in college. So
that's fascinating. And so just even to go back even to the boarding school, like what did you enjoy study? What subjects did you like at that stage?
I was never academic at all, and I was fortunate that I picked things up easily, but I was not, for sure, I wasn't an academic. I wasn't a person who studied. I would cram for exams, and I'm not recommending that at all, but that was my method of learning and retaining knowledge, was by short-term memory, and rather than this over a longer period of time. So it's just different ways that people retain information. So no, I wasn't a very studious student, and I think that's why when I left school, I ended up, I was an apprentice, and I think that's a role that really suited me, because it was the combination of studying and practical, and always reinforcing your learning with a practical example.
Excellent. So where did that start then, the apprenticeship for you? Where was that?
Yeah, so I left school, and my grandfather had actually had me in a flight simulator when I was 8 years of age, and I wanted to become a pilot. And that was all I wanted to do, was become a pilot. So when I was leaving school, I wanted to become a pilot, but there's no college course become a pilot. or certainly back in the early 90s, there wasn't. So it wasn't an opportunity for me, but that's what I wanted. So I knew that aviation was going to be a track, but again, from a college point of view, the options were very limited. So there was no courses available that I could go into directly from college or anything else. So I left school obviously in the kind of June, July, and in the September, Aer Lingus advertised for apprentices. And it was actually my dad came along to me and said, look, you want to be a pilot. Surely going to work for the national airline is going to be this is your entry. There was nobody recruiting pilots. There was no such thing as direct entry pilots at that point. Sorry, there was only direct entry pilots where you went through sorry, not direct entry, that you went in as a cadet into the school. You can go in and do your pilot training and then go in as a direct entry. So he said, like, this is a real opportunity for you to get into the national airline, and even if it's on a slightly different route to what you planned, at least you're there and you're in the internal circle there. You can go, you can work there, you can work your magic then while you're there to end up in your role as a pilot, which is what you want. So I applied and I got it. And at the time, when you look back at those days, I think there was like 7,000 applicants, and there was 40 people taken on from those 7,000 applicants. That just shows how popular, number one, apprenticeships were. Which they, which was a huge thing at the time around apprenticeships, and the other thing was how popular it was to work for Aer Lingus. It was our national, it is still our, a national airline, and and how important it is that we have those apprenticeship schemes. Ryanair are doing them now as well, and it's really important that we support apprenticeship schemes. I know down in Shannon now, Atlantic are doing them too, and there's a couple of others as well. So it's really important. Yes. Conor McCarthy's always been a very real advocate for it as well. So it's really important that we have these apprenticeship schemes that give people who learn through learning and doing a much greater opportunity to enhance their skill sets. And, and it's such a practical role when you're finished. Putting somebody in college for 4 years isn't always the answer to how to educate them.
Absolutely. And I think many people would be very, appreciative of that, Julie, like the fact that you've got to where you are. And I mean, we're only just about getting started here, but the fact that you weren't the academic person, you were more hands-on, more practical. What I love is that, the two kind of men in your formative years, like your granddad and your dad, obviously had a huge influence on your decisions at the time. And can you tell me a little bit about the flight simulator with your granddad when you were younger?
And what's really interesting about it is, because it is quite striking, and neither of them ever considered me as like a granddaughter or daughter. Do you know what I mean? I was a person who was ambitious, who wanted to do certain things in my life, and had certain traits, whether it's independence, whether it's, and a level of ability as well, that they knew that they could channel into something. And they both saw it, and they saw it way before I did. I mean, my grandfather taking me into the flight sim at 8, and put me into the seat, and off I went flying. It was absolutely fantastic. But again, he didn't see it as putting a girl in the seat. It was his grandchild. And if they have an ability to do this, then that should be promoted and should be worked on. And, and unfortunately, he had retired by the time I was really leaving school. So I never got the opportunity to properly engage until I'd actually done my own flying, and he was over. He was living in the UK, and he came back over, and I actually got to take him up flying myself, which was one of my greatest achievements, was when I got to bring him flying and actually instruct him in the airplane. And we went in, and actually Dublin Airport facilitated us landing in at Dublin Airport, doing a touch and go at Dublin Airport, and heading back out to Weston. So that was one of my very definite achievements, because it was the full circle of where he'd had me in a flight simulator at 8 years of age, and then me bringing him up in a small airplane, and he hadn't been in an airplane for between 10 and 15 years at that stage. Anyway.
And did your granddad work with Aer Lingus, or?
Yeah, he was the fleet captain on 747s with Aer Lingus.
Okay,
so he retired out of Aer Lingus on 747.
Okay, so it was in the DNA at that stage anyway.
Yep. And my dad had also, he had done his, he worked with Air Aran actually, which was the first company that I ended up working with, but as an engineer back in the day. And my grandfather had also done some flying with him, but he reckoned between his son and his son-in-law, he would have made a great pilot. One was great at the books, one was great at the practical stuff, but between the two of them, they needed to join up together. So they really had, and my dad was always the one with the practical, which is obviously where I got it from as well. So
yeah. So in terms of those skills then, so you did the apprenticeship. What would you say were your strong suite of skills that were starting to emerge at that time? Like what were you excelling at that stage?
Yeah, so I think one of the things is that it's find your tribe, you know, and this is something that we talk about. Like I was very fortunate, and that, you know, at that time, I think there was about, I think there's about 4,500 people working in Aer Lingus at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And out of, let's say, there was maybe 1,500 or so on the hangar floor. And out of that, we were number 5 and 6 females.
Oh,
Alison started with me as well, and myself. We were number 5 and 6. So out
wow.
of 1,500 engineers on the floor, on the shop floor. And I think that's like, but at the same time, the class that I had, again, they didn't see you as a girl. You were just one of the classmates. You weren't, and we all get together. We get together at least once a year. We all have a few drinks, and we have track of WhatsApp groups and everything else. And we really keep in touch. And that's since we started in January 1991, and we still all keep in touch now.
Wow.
And it's tremendous, and it is really about find your tribe. And I think I did that again when I did coming back to setting up Avtrain again. I ended up with a group of female founders, and I think they've been a massive support to me more recently, where it's different challenges, very different challenges. But at that time, you were seen then though as well by some of the. It was a very different environment that we lived in back then. It was the early 90s. You were a female on the hangar floor, and it was very different. And it was certainly, there was a lot of challenges. I hope that things have really moved on. I believe they have. And, you know, but some of the challenges that you would have faced from certainly some of the more, maybe some of the elder people who were working there, who had been working there all their lives. And this was the first time they were seeing a female on a hangar floor and wondered what on earth we were doing there. We were there to make tea, was kind of
Yeah.
So, you know, this was something that you had to overcome as well. And I think, you know, developing and growing a thick skin. And it's not, we shouldn't have to, but at the same time, we shouldn't take everything to heart. And I think we need to allow a certain, you know, we should never allow things to wash over us, but at the same time, we shouldn't take everything that happens to heart. And we tend to be much more, as females, we tend to be much more self-analytical, self-critical, all of these things. These are natural inherent traits that we have. And sometimes maybe we should leave them a little bit at the door and not be as self-critical. I'm not saying we shouldn't, you know, that we shouldn't speak out or anything like that, but we shouldn't necessarily be overanalyze ourselves.
Overanalyzing, yeah. And so you found your tribe, you developed a thick skin by the sounds of it. You obviously excelled in your course and your apprenticeship at the time. And you found another female as well there at the top of the ranks with you. So what happened then, Julie? Where did you go to from there?
So as part of that, we, like, obviously the time that we were in Aer Lingus was quite a turbulent time for Aer Lingus, and it was at the time when it split into Aer Lingus and Team Aer Lingus, and there was a lot of, you know, there was, you know, a good degree of unrest within the organization. I was there for 6 years, and then just coming on 7 years, and then I was offered a role. I had been working with, it was Hunting Cargo Airlines at the time. It became it was Hunting Cargo, and then it became our contractors, and is now ASL, who you'll know in Shannon. They have the hangar down in Shannon there, and they're based up here in Dublin as well, but they're a global airline. And I was working with them as on a lot of the rotable components that they had, and on AOG aircraft, and managing those roles for them in my role in Team Aer Lingus. And they offered me a role, and I jumped at it. It was a great opportunity. I went in there as a line maintenance controller, which, you know, was a fantastic job, fantastic role. And Hugh Flynn really became a mentor to me at that point in time. Hugh, I'd spoken to Hugh about the fact that I wanted to go flying. That's what I wanted to be. There was myself and another guy who was in ops, Seamus Carney. The two of us really had, both of our ambitions were to become pilots, and we were both looking out for the opportunities, because we saw the self-improver route was definitely going to be a route to it, where you go off, you do your training yourself, you self-fund your training, and then you come back as a qualified pilot and you apply as a direct entry into an airline. And both of us saw that as the route, because there was no airlines, again, recruiting for cadetships at the time. And I was the first one to go off and do it. And Hugh was very supportive of that at the time, while I was in Hunting and become our contractors at that time, hugely supportive, and has been very supportive to me throughout my career, which is just fantastic. Again, it was really another very significant male role model and mentor in
Absolutely. So you did that then, and did you fund that yourself? Do you mind me asking, or was it through?
Yeah, I funded it myself. Hugh had gave me a small contribution towards it through our contractors, and his idea and belief at that time was that if we support people within the industry, if we support good people within the industry will have good people. And it doesn't have to be that you support them individually as a company and that they come back to you. It's about the growth of the industry. And I just thought it was really far-seeing of him, and that it was about the improvement of the industry as a whole. And if you look at what he's doing now at the moment, say with the likes of Cargo Vision, where he's looking at sustainability within the cargo industry and the movement of freight, particularly from an aviation perspective, looking at hydrogen, electric fuels, all of these different, really novel ways that we can move towards, and not just looking at SAF. And, he's always been very inspiring in how to improve the industry, not just profit of the bottom line of a particular company. So he supported me, and a lot of the guys in our contractors were South African. So it was actually South Africa I went down to Johannesburg and did my initial private pilot's license, some hour building down there, and then came back here and went out to National Flight Centre out at Weston Airport.
Okay, out of Weston. And the next chapter then is this the era of you, just moving more into that, becoming more established in your career then?
Yeah, so I did my instructor's rating out in Weston, and I also did some corporate. I did my US my FAA ATP as well. So I had that, and I did a little bit of corporate flying, was flying citations, and did some aerial photography, had my instructor's rating, and then an opportunity came up in Air Ireland as a first officer. And I applied for that, and actually I did my interview with Paddy Morrissey, and he asked me a question about windscreens and what would happen if people tightened up the bolt in the windscreens as they were heading across the Atlantic. And I said, I think I can tell you a little bit more about that story. And it turned out that it had been my grandfather. It was the story that he was telling, where they had got new ratchet sets or socket sets in Sears in New York, and they were flying back across, and a few of them had tightened up a few nuts on the windscreens, and of course the windscreens cracked as they descended.
Hopefully
it was it's just funny while we were there that it was, that it wasn't actually my grandfather who had done it. So,
but he was flying the plane.
But he was on the aircraft, and there was various other crew members on the aircraft as well. But it was just really interesting as time went on about the connections. My grandfather had trained Paddy, and Paddy ended up training me in Air Ireland as a training.
Full circle moment.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of that, and I think that happens as well in the aviation industry. It's a small industry, it's local, and people support people within the industry as well, which is important.
Yeah, I found that as well, working with some of the women in aviation groups and that, very, very welcoming, and it is a tight-knit community, so in terms of then moving into the next phase of your career, tell us a bit about the next chapter.
So in Air Ireland, I was the first officer. I became the flight safety officer there and got very involved in the flight safety department. I was also still working in Weston part-time as an instructor. I also looked after a lot of the compliance out there. We set up a Part 145 maintenance base, set up a float plane AOC, so a little float plane airline, licensed pieces of water as airports, really novel stuff. And really, I think they had a Julie department in the IEA, because every time I knocked on their door and asked them for something, it was always something particularly complex. And I don't think that's changed over the years. I think I'm still doing the same thing, but now it's with drones and advanced air mobility and eVTOLs and electric aviation and all sorts of vertiports and all sorts of new new technology and they've always been a very positive regulator. So it's always been, we out in Weston, when we were looking at doing things and breaking some of the boundaries, particularly with float plane AOCs and things like that, and licensing pieces of water, and they've always been very supportive of that kind of innovation. So I was still involved in Weston, as I say, doing compliance. I was the quality manager in the Part 145 out there, and I was also compliance within the flying school and within the AOC as well. And so I kept that up throughout my flying. And from Air Ireland, then I went into, I was a training captain in Air Ireland, and then I went into CityJet as a direct entry captain. And I was in CityJet as, I was based in Dublin and flying the RJ85 and the BA 146. And then I decided that I wasn't going to retire from the left-hand seat of an airplane. And so I decided that I was going to study. Now, if you kind of think around the timing around this is around 2000 and 2008. So it's at the height of the Celtic Tiger, and it's
just before things went.
just as we're about to tip over into the massive recession. And I started studying, and I decided, I talked to CityJet and I said, listen, I want to carry on flying, but I do want to study part-time. And I decided to really challenge myself and do something that was really purely academic, which was law. And it was a real departure from what I had done, because everything, when you look at flying is about learning something in a book and then applying it from a practical perspective. Same with the engineering side of it. It's learning something, how to do something, and then it's going and applying it and practicing it and reinforcing that learning. It's different in law. You still have to learn, and you still reinforce that through practical, but you have to stand up in a courtroom, and that's your practical experience defending a client, or supporting a client's case. So very, very different, and the learning is very different, and it's much more analytical, and it's much more about reading something and looking at two sides of any piece of any legislation, or how can it be interpreted? How can, that's why there's two sides to every court case. It's because there's two opinions. And it's about being able to see both of those. And if you're going to be a really good lawyer, you need to be able to know what the other side's arguments are going to be, so that you can counter them before they even start.
Yes.
We used to say, get your retaliation in first. So, but it was very, very different, and it was very difficult. I have to say, for me to apply myself in that way. I did the King's Inns diploma in legal studies, and that was part-time. It was called part-time, but the reality is it's more than a lot of hours per week than a lot of full-time courses are. It was 3 hours a night, 5 nights a week. And I was flying a full-time flying roster as well while I was doing that as well. So that was really tough. Now, the second year, I actually had broken a bone in my foot, which actually had me off flying for a period of the second year. So I actually was, it was
more time in the second year.
I was grounded for a period of it. So it was, from a study point of view, it was a little bit easier. And that probably actually was what got me through, in fairness, in the end of it, because it was very, very intensive, and, flying full time and studying full time. Was very challenging. I got through the diploma legal studies, and then we did the entrance exams into King's Inns, and then I took leave of absence from CityJet, which I planned at I planned on taking the leave of absence from CityJet for a year, and they had agreed to that. And then, but this was at the start of the recession, and this is 2009 into 2010. So I think they were actually delighted, because as a training captain in CityJet, I was probably one of the most expensive commodities in the airline. Part of the airplanes themselves. So, so they were delighted for me to take leave of absence. I did the year in King's Inns, qualified, got called to the bar. And again, I had planned on deferring the deviling. So if you qualify as a barrister, you do what's called deviling and pupillage, and it's where you have a master and a devil, and you go and you work basically with a more senior lawyer for the year, a barrister for the year, and they take you under their wing, and you do that, and they give you work, and you work, and so you're working under supervision, if you like. So it's a little bit like an apprenticeship. It's like going back to that thing of having somebody, but it's one-on-ones. And I had planned on deferring that, and CityJet offered me another year's leave of absence, so I did it. And the first time I stood up in a courtroom, I said, "This is me." And as my other half at the time turned around and said to me, "Sure, you're getting paid for arguing. Why wouldn't you love it?" So,
but you did it. And
yes, I did it. And then CityJet offered me another year leave of absence after that, and I took that as well. And then after that, then they asked me to make a decision, and I decided to stick at it. And then I stayed. I was in the law library for 5 years. Very different place, and very different to how I'd imagined it. I figured. I also did at that time. I did a postgrad diploma in arbitration in UCD, and became a fellow at the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. And I also did the accredited mediator. And I think both of those gave me, again, you're back to analytical skills, looking at things from both sides, being able to review something, and to see through the words on the page, and see through to a bigger story. So I think all of that really helped from an analytical point of view. I went in then to started missing flying, started missing in the airlines. I didn't miss flying because I didn't miss a full-time flying roster. Like, the only reason that I stopped flying was because of lifestyle. And I know we talk about lifestyle. It was really, I went through a year, possibly 18 months. And the roster in CityJet was pretty tough. You were away a lot of the time. It's somewhat unpredictable. There was no fixed roster. So you didn't know from, you got your roster a month in advance, and you could be anywhere for any days of that in that period.
Yeah. That must be a challenge then with your personal life, obviously.
Very, very much so. And it just got to the point where I went through more than a year where I had missed every single wedding, funeral, christening. It didn't matter what it was, I missed it. And that becomes very wearing. And also, again, my other half at the time wasn't that well. And, you know, and it was just about priorities in your life as well. And, you know, your priority is your life and how you live it.
Yeah.
Away all the time and missing everything, you know, was so it was when the decision came as to whether or not I was going to go back flying to a full-time flying roster or whether I was going to stay at the bar, it wasn't that difficult a decision to make, because I could still fly for fun. So I could still have my passion for aviation and I could have the lifestyle that I wanted, which was actually being able to decide my own future, my own destiny, and my not so much my working hours, because it's a very standard, you know, working times. And, you know, as a barrister, you tend to work an awful lot of additional hours outside of what one normal working week would be. But
yeah, the hidden hours, I'm sure, phenomenal. People don't see that from the outside looking in.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I started missing, and an opportunity came up where I was approached by a recruitment agency about a role in Norwegian, and literally the day that they approached me couldn't have been better. You know, it was just one of these days where the world had conspired to decide that was what my future was. And and I went and I spoke to Norwegian, and I think Tamarald and Tora kind of looked at each other going, is she for real? Like, they were kind of poking me, going like, she literally ticks every single solitary box that we want. She has all the engineering. She can take on the part Form 4 holder for the Form 4 holder for the quality manager and for the compliance manager within the airline and on the maintenance side as well. She has the correct qualifications for it. She's, you know, been authorized by the IAA previously, because I was doing that out in Weston as well. You know, and having that really broad experience as well, plus all the legal stuff. And Norwegian had challenges at the time where they were looking to start operating across the Atlantic. So I went in there.
Absolute dream candidate.
Yeah. And I loved it. I mean, I loved working with Norwegian. I love the challenges that it threw up. I did a lot of project management around their kind of looking at their shared services model and all of that. But I had started working with drones at that stage, and drones had started to become 2014 was when I started getting into drones. And that was at the provoking of the Irish Aviation Authority. They had seen drones starting to fly off the shelves in a lot of you know, commercial, when I say commercial, I mean consumer drones flying off the shelf. And they, again, back to the Aviation Authority in this country being very proactive and very forward thinking, what they looked at was a way to manage this and allow for it to happen rather than a way to restrict it. So we worked with them. I set up at that time, was the founding chair with the committee for the Unmanned Aircraft Association of Ireland, so the UAAI, and we did that with the support of the IAA. And we worked closely with the IAA on the development of the statutory instrument that was published in 2015, which set up a system which has been replaced now by a European system, but it's very similar, where we have an operator authorization, so similar to a drone operator becoming a little airline, and then they have pilots, so they have pilot licensing. And we set up that system back in 2015, and Ireland was the first country in Europe to have a drone register. So that's when I started getting involved in drones. And then
so when you're talking about like for commercial use, obviously it's like more for, and what the users here that need to register with that, like, who would they be?
So everybody, so that kind of, it fast forwards then to kind of 2019, and that's where we got our European regulations. So the European regulations replaced the Irish regulations, and under the European regulations, any person who operates a drone above 250 grams or more must register as an operator. Now, 250 grams is just a little bit heavier than your mobile phone. It's not there. So a mobile phone's about 180 grams, I think it is. So it's not that much heavier than a mobile phone. So 250 grams or more, you have to register as an operator. And if it's under 250 grams and has a camera on it, you also have to register. So even if there's a lot of drones out there that are intentionally 249 grams that are being marketed, but once it has a camera on it, you do fall under the regulation and you have to register as an operator. Now, from there, there's a whole various different layers of complexity, depending on the risk your operation is to uninvolved people, whether they're on the ground or in the air, as to the level of training and operator certification that you're required to have. We have what's called open, specific, and certified categories. So we've got 3 kind of different levels of risk. And within those categories, then we break them down. There's kind of 3 levels within the open category, 6 levels within the specific category. So it's very much delineated then as to the level of training, the level of operator certification, and the qualifications that both the pilot and the operator have to have, and the risk assessments that they have to carry out, and the mitigations for those risk managements that they put in place.
Okay.
That's when it's once I saw the European regulation coming into place, I decided it was time to give up my nice fancy job that put money in the bank every month and set up Avtrain. And we got a huge support from Enterprise Ireland at that time.
Yeah.
Which is tremendous, and we still get huge support from Enterprise Ireland. We travel with them a lot. We go to trade shows with them.
Yeah, I see you online touring the world at the moment with Avtrain. And how's that been going for you, building business?
Absolutely fantastic. Off to Kazakhstan this week. So tomorrow I'm going to Kazakhstan. And this is part of, I mentioned the Unmanned Aircraft Association, and as part of the UAI, where the Unmanned Aircraft Association is one of the founding associations of JEDA, which is the Joint European Drone Associations. And in February of this year, I was voted in as the president. We're just 2 years old now. And I was voted in as the president of JEDA, which is an incredible role to be, honor for me to be voted in as that. And we've got 22 associations from 19 different European member states that we represent for drone operators. And it's just a tremendous outreach to the grassroots of the industry. And then we're dealing at top level with EASA, with the European Commission. But as part of that, as part of my role in JEDA, I also sit on JARIS, which is the Joint Authorities for Rulemaking on Unmanned Systems. And JARIS is a global body which is made up about 70% of aviation regulators from around the world who come together to write the future regulation. And then there's a really significant industry input into that, which is about 30% is made up from industry. So people from industry coming in and giving their expertise alongside the regulators to make sure that we've got proportionate regulation as we move forward, and that we look at what the technological advances are within the industry, and we make sure that we're allowing for those to continue to take place. So I sit as the vice chair of the industry stakeholders body steering committee in JARIS. So off to Kazakhstan tomorrow for our plenary session in Kazakhstan, where we'll be voting in on Friday. The regulators will be voting in on SORA 2.5, which is the latest update to the risk profiles, and that's used globally. So it's trying to also put standardized or have regulations that are available across the globe to any country that wishes to adopt them, to try and get some commonality in the regulatory.
And where do you see the future of that particular industry going, Julie? Like, it's obviously really important that these regulatory issues are bedded in at this stage, and that there is consistency across how these are flown around the European Union and outside of it. So, like, what's the future for people who don't know about drone usage? Like, why is this so important?
So absolutely. So, I mean, I started in this in kind of 2014, 10 years ago, and I was out in the field going, the drones are coming, and people thought I was absolutely stark raving mad, you know. Now here, at least 10 years later, that's been validated. But now I'm shouting out in the field and I'm going, advanced air mobility is coming, eVTOLs are coming, air taxis are coming. And that is the future of this. You know, eVTOLs stands for their electric vertical takeoff and landing. And so what they are is they are a distributed, got a significantly distributed propulsion. So they're a lot quieter. They're driven by electricity, so they're more sustainable. You know, from an emissions point of view, and or electric power, should I say? And depending, some of them are hybrid and hydrogen. Mainly electric. And what they are is looking at like Beta Technology is a good example of one. They were over here for TRA, Transport Research Arena here. They're so they have their flight simulator over here, being able to demonstrate what an air taxi looks like. And we've got
what does it look like? Because I know people around here in this region have heard about how, you know, JP McManus wants to have air taxis for the Golf Classic and have all that set up for Adair Manor.
Yeah, so we work closely. Yeah, absolutely. We work closely down with Future Mobility Campus Ireland and Shannon Airport Group and ourselves, and that's looking at FMCI Air. So having a vertiport, so having the infrastructure in place to allow for it to happen is the first thing, and then having these air taxis actually certified. Now, when they first arrive, they are going to be piloted. There's going to be a pilot in them. They're not going to be flying autonomously. You're not going to go in onto your Uber, your Beta app or whatever it's going to be. You're not going to go into that and program in your postcode and have this thing land outside in your back garden and pick you up and fly autonomously to wherever you want to go. You know, they were structured routings. We're also involved in what's called a digital sky demonstrator down in Shannon, where we're building out and looking at lower airspace management. And that was a €7 million CESAR fund, which is a Single European Skies Advanced Research. And that's with Future Mobility, Ireland, Shannon Airport Group, Collins Aerospace, ourselves, AirNav Ireland. And that's looking at the airspace management. So there are just so many pieces of this jigsaw that need to fit together in order for the industry to truly take off, pun intended. So you've got infrastructure, you've got airspace, you've got design of the aircraft themselves, you've got certification of the aircraft, you've got pilot training, and then operator certification as well. So we need this regulatory standard. But what the drone industry is doing is laying the foundations for that future industry in a really solid way, so that we can look towards levels of autonomy on a much smaller scale with much smaller aircraft, and to trust that technology. You can, you know, you're out in Blanchardstown at the moment, you can get your pizza and your coffees delivered by drone into your back garden, and all we're doing is just increasing that now and scaling that up to different levels of aircraft certification as well. So the future's bright.
The future is bright. The future is drone and air mobility, and obviously all the ESG movement. That's a whole other podcast, I think, as well, looking at the sustainability side of things. But in terms of, for you, Julie, as we wind this down, like, how do you manage all these priorities? How do you stay focused and healthy and happy and content? And what's the secret?
So, well, at the moment, we're fundraising at the moment. And this is probably one of the most challenging things I think that we've done, because it's really putting yourself, you're out there selling yourself every day, all day, every day. And I think of all of the things that I've done throughout my career, this is probably the hardest one, because you're trying to be the CEO of a company where you're doing everything within the company. And you need to take that time out. You have to take that time out. So I'm really fortunate. I live in this Dublin city centre. The office is down the road in the Liberties and Guinness Enterprise Centre. So, but I'm really fortunate that I have a whole bunch of family who live down around Carrick and Shannon. I have to shout out to my sisters running in the local elections, Sharon, both Sharon. And she's but it's being able to go down there, spend time on the river, kick back, time with family, time with friends, and being able to, you know, sit around on boats. So definitely the airplanes and boats are and when you combine the two of them and you get float planes, don't even start me talking about float planes and going flying float planes. But that's I think spending time with friends and family, so important, and it just detaches you somewhat from the business as well. And it's important to have that switch off time as well. And it does allow you to just refocus as well, and you come back more refreshed and better able for what you're actually planning on doing on a day-by-day basis. So it is so important to take that time out. But I should practice what I preach a little bit more sometimes.
Yeah, I'd say if we ask the people who knew you well, would they say that you're able to switch off? Or?
No. And even you know, planning holidays or anything. I took up. I actually one of the things I did recently, which was you know, when you talk about how to do things to the extreme, I decided I have a real fear of my face being underwater. I nearly drowned, and I was racing speedboats, and the back of my leg was chopped up by a propeller when I was a teenager. And so I don't like boats in the water around me. And I decided in January I was going away with my family on holidays, and I decided that I was going to learn to scuba dive while I was away. Absolutely terrifying, completely faced so many different fears. And they were supposed to be going on a relaxing holiday, and this is what you're doing. And I said, this is genuinely forces me absolutely to switch off.
Yeah.
No way anybody can contact me if I'm 18 meters under the ocean. There's absolutely, and the only thing I'm concentrating on is breathe in.
Yes.
And that to me was one of the, actually, although it was terrifying, absolutely terrifying, really challenged so many fears that I have, it's probably one of the most relaxing things that I've done. Because it did just channel all of my energy into a different direction for a period of time.
Yes, and so very present moment. I can imagine there's no room for anything else in there.
Absolutely. And I think that change of focus, while it's changing to something else that you're really focused on, sometimes if your brain is that busy and running away all the time, that change, focusing it to something else can be the equivalent of resting it. It's just that diversionary tactic. So yeah, that's my latest thing now, is scuba diving. So
scuba diving. Okay, well, we feel that that's not going to be the end of it by any means. I'm sure there's more in line for you in the future. And Julie, I wish you the very best of luck with everything and all of your endeavors and your trip to Kazakhstan. Finally, I do ask, you know, all the women that I interview, if you had advice for anyone starting out in business, in any female really, as this podcast is aimed at, Have you a word of advice for people who might have an idea or a concept or anything that they're trying to bring to fruition?
Yeah, do it and find your tribe. So find people that you can talk to about what it is you want to do, and build that little network around you, build a close network around you. And people are actually, you'd be so surprised when you reach out how supportive people are when you ask for help. So it's about asking for that help. If you don't ask for it, people don't know you need it. So it's really important to reach out to people. I think just do it is a really important one as well. We as females, we question, we won't do things until we have every I dotted and T crossed. We're far too self-analytical, self-critical. Done is better than perfect. And so just do it and go out, grab the opportunities. If a job offer comes up in a newspaper or in a magazine or something, a guy will look at it and go, that sounds great. And will apply for it. A female will go through every single criteria. And if they don't meet one of them, won't apply, and just the difference in how we're built. So, just do it and find your tribe.
Fabulous. Well, Julie Garland, you are an extraordinary woman. Thank you for being on my podcast.
Denise, thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for chatting.
Brilliant. Thank you. You've been listening to Extraordinary Women with Denise O'Brien and guests. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to get in touch, please contact me directly at denise@o'brienlearningsolutions.ie or check out my website www.o'brienlearningsolutions.ie, where you'll find more free resources and interesting articles. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to spread the word and get in touch if you are an extraordinary woman who would like to share her story.